The morning my son let go of my wheelchair at the top of the boat ramp, the wind tasted like old summers. The metal under my hands was cool, a little sticky with salt. My blue enamel mug sat snug in the cup holder on my armrest, half full of lukewarm coffee. It bumped my fingers as the chair rolled over the cracks in the concrete. "Just a little fresh air, Mom," Mark said behind me, his voice too bright. "You're always cooped up in that house." The marina parking lot was only half full. A few pickup trucks, the smell of gas and fish, a gull screeching at somebody's cooler. I could hear the water lapping gently against the pilings. It had been years since I'd come down this far. Mostly we just drove by on the way to the grocery store. "I don't know, honey," I said. "The ramp looks steep. Maybe we stay up here?" He chuckled. "It's fine. I've got you. Trust me." If you're a woman my age, you probably know that sentence has a different weight when it comes out of your child's mouth. You remember changing their diapers, teaching them to cross the street, pulling them away from hot stoves. Trust me, from a son feels complicated. He angled the chair toward the top of the boat ramp. The concrete sloped straight down into the harbor, shining wet where the tide had recently covered it. There was some green slime at the edges, a strip of algae along one side, a chain stretched across the bottom that bobbed in the water. "Mark," I said, my fingers tightening around the armrests, "please keep a hand on the chair. That slope—" "I know what I'm doing, Mom," he said. "Relax. Just breathe a little." The front wheels rolled over the lip of the ramp, and my stomach dipped. I could feel gravity tugging at the chair. I reached automatically for the brakes, found them under my fingers, but the slope was gentle at the top. He was still behind me, close enough that I could feel his breath when he laughed. And then, just as the chair tipped into the real fall of the ramp, his hands left the grips. It was such a small thing. 2 thuds as his palms disconnected from the rubber. The sound of his sneakers scraping back on the concrete. The chair suddenly gliding a little freer than before, picking up the tiniest bit of speed. "Mark," I said sharply. I heard him behind me, not answering, his voice dropping low like he was talking to himself, or to the gulls, or maybe to the water. "At least the house will be ours," he muttered. The wheels rolled faster. My coffee sloshed up the side of the mug. The shoreline tilted in my vision, the blue and gray of the harbor blurring as my chair started down the ramp. For a second, I froze. My hands hovered over the brakes, stupidly. My brain refused to connect the words I'd just heard with the boy I'd raised. Maybe you've had a moment like that too, where your mind pushes the truth away because it's too ugly to look at. A shout cut through the wind. "Hey, hey, brake, ma'am, hit your brakes." The voice came from the side, stronger than my own, sharp with panic. Something heavy thudded against the ramp, boots, and then a pair of hands slammed into the left side of my wheelchair, wrenching it sideways. The jolt snapped me out of it. My thumb and fingers slammed down on the brake levers. The chair squealed, skidding a foot or two. My blue mug bounced and tipped, spilling coffee down my blanket. The world steadied. The front wheels stopped maybe 10, 12 feet down the ramp. The water shimmered a little closer than I ever wanted it to. My heart banged in my chest. The smell of gasoline and seaweed slammed into my nose, and for a second I wasn't 68 years old in a discount wheelchair. I was 30 again, barefoot on this same ramp, watching my husband Tom back our old fishing boat into the harbor. Mark, in a little red life jacket, clapping his hands. "Whoa there, ma'am." The man by my chair panted, his hands still braced against the metal. He wore a navy jacket with a patch on the sleeve, City Harbor Patrol, and a beanie pulled down over sandy curls. He couldn't have been more than 30. "You okay? You hurt anywhere?" I... My voice wobbled. No, I'm okay. Thank you." Behind us, footsteps smacked on the concrete. Mark's. "What the hell are you doing?" Mark shouted. "Get away from my mother. I was just taking her down to see the water." The harbor guard turned his head slowly, still holding my wheelchair in place. His eyes were light blue, surprisingly gentle for someone speaking through clenched teeth. "Was that your plan?" he asked. "Because from over there it looked like you let go of her on a slick ramp." He nodded toward a little harbor office, half hidden behind a stack of lobster traps. I hadn't even noticed it. "You weren't supposed to see that," I thought. My brain still scrambled. The words my son had said were starting to replay on a loop. "At least the house will be ours." My hands trembled on the armrests. I glanced down at my blue enamel mug, lying on its side now in the cup holder, a thin line of coffee running down the cracked plastic. Tom had given me that mug for my 35th birthday, back when a romantic gift meant a camping trip instead of a restaurant. "For every sunrise we're going to see together," he'd said, handing it to me over a thermos of cocoa at this very marina. He'd drawn a tiny fish on the side with a black marker, long faded now. I'd drunk coffee out of it every morning for decades. I'd let Mark convince me to put it in the wheelchair holder at the last minute for the cute old lady aesthetic, he joked. Now it wobbled there, helpless as I felt. "Mom?" Mark came around to the side of the chair. His face was pale, his jaw clenched. "Are you okay? That ramp is slick. I was just going to grab the side rail and—" "I heard you," I blurted, my voice thin. "What you said." He blinked. "What? I didn't say anything. I was just—" "At least the house will be ours," the harbor guard said quietly. He didn't raise his voice. "That's what you said, right before you let go of her." Mark's head snapped toward him. "You misheard. I said the harbor's ours. Like the view. I was talking about the view." Even in that moment, a part of me wanted to laugh. "The harbor's ours? Who talks like that?" The guard looked at me again. "My name's Eli," he said. "Ma'am, I'm going to help you back up this ramp, okay? Slowly. We're going to get your brakes checked, too. That downhill has claimed more than one set of wheels." He said it neutrally enough, but his eyes flicked once more to Mark, and I saw something there, a question and maybe a warning. My fingers tightened around the armrests. "Okay," I whispered. Mark moved to grab the handles, but Eli stepped in first. "I've got her," he said. "You can walk ahead and clear a path." Mark's mouth opened, then shut. He took a step back, then walked ahead of us, stiff-backed. Eli pushed me carefully up the ramp, his boots digging into the grooves. Halfway up, as the angle flattened out, I felt my lungs catch up to my body. My heart slowed. The mist off the water felt less like a threat and more like air again. "You really okay?" Eli murmured, just for me. "We've got a first aid kit in the office. Some water." "I'm fine," I lied. "Just shaken. Thank you." He nodded but didn't look convinced. Up close, he had a scattering of freckles across his nose, like someone had shaken cinnamon over him. When we reached the flat pavement, he locked my chair with a practiced flick of his fingers and straightened. "I'm required to file an incident report if there's a safety concern on the ramp," he said. "If you'd like, I can note that your brakes slipped. Or his gaze slid to Mark. If you think something else happened, we can talk about that inside. Either way, I'd like to check that chair over before you leave. Mark was already shaking his head. This is ridiculous. She's fine. Mom, tell him you're fine. We don't need a report. I'm taking you home. The word home landed differently now, heavy and sharp. The house. The house will be ours. I'd like my chair checked, I said, surprising myself. Please. Mark stared at me, betrayed. Mom. I swallowed. If you've ever felt your own voice surprise you, you know the sensation. Like watching your hand sign something your mind hasn't caught up with yet. My chair, I repeated, more steadily. I want to make sure it's safe. Eli nodded once, businesslike. Yes, ma'am. Let's step into the office for a minute. There's a ramp in. Mark sighed loudly. Fine, whatever. Make it quick. I've got to get back. He cut his eyes at me. Jenna's making lunch. We all knew Jenna wasn't making lunch. The only thing my daughter-in-law heated up most days were her hair straightener and online shopping app. But that was another sore tooth in my mouth, and I could only poke at so many at once. Inside the harbor office, the air smelled like old coffee and wet rope. A radio murmured low country music. Eli had me sit in the chair in the center of the room while he squatted down and checked the wheels, the brakes, running his fingers along the metal. No mechanical issues that would explain that slide, he said finally, straightening. Brakes are good, wheels are solid, ramp's damp but not slick enough to send you flying on its own. Mark threw up his hands. So, now what? You going to arrest me for walking behind my mother? No one's talking about arresting anyone, Eli said calmly. I am going to write that you rolled down the ramp unattended, though, and that I heard a comment about a house. That way, if your mom wants follow-up, there's a record. The word record made something flutter in my stomach. Tom used to keep careful little piles of receipts on the kitchen table. Gas, groceries, oil for the boat. He'd sort them into stacks and tap them neatly, satisfied. It's not about the numbers, he'd tell me, sliding them into old envelopes. It's about knowing where we are. Where we are. Right now, I was in a drafty harbor office with a stranger and my son, and my life had just tilted like the chair on that ramp. I'd like a copy, I heard myself say. Of the report, I meant. Of something that said in black and white that what I'd heard wasn't just in my head. Eli's eyes softened. Of course, he said. I'll print one before you go. Mark was fuming on the folding chair by the door, arms crossed. You're making a big deal out of nothing, he muttered. You're overreacting, Mom. You know how you get. I thought of the way his hands had felt letting go. Quick, deliberate. I thought of the mortgage statements in my desk drawer, my name alone at the bottom. I thought of the boxes of their clothes in my guest room, the chipped paint on the banister since their boys started sliding down it, the overdraft fees from when their emergencies had needed my card. And then, as Eli filled out the form, my eyes dropped to my blue mug again. It sat on the little end table by the door, where he'd set it while checking my chair. Coffee had dried in a brown ring down the side. The tiny faded fish was barely visible, just a ghostly outline. My hand itched to hold it, to wrap my fingers around something solid that belonged only to me. When we finally left the harbor, Mark pushed me a little too fast across the parking lot, the tires bumping over cracks. My mug rattled in the cup holder with each jolt "Unbelievable," he muttered. "Some kid with a badge thinks he can tell me how to take care of my own mother." I didn't answer. I watched the harbor recede in the side mirror of his truck as he loaded my chair. The water shimmered, calm again. Eli stood by the ramp, clipboard in hand, watching us go. He raised a hand. Not a wave exactly, more of a question mark drawn in the air. I gave the tiniest nod. He didn't know it, but he'd just done something my own son hadn't done in a long time. He'd believed me. Back home, my house smelled like the chicken I'd put in the slow cooker and someone else's cologne. Mark's teenage boys were loudly playing a video game in the living room, their voices rising and falling over gunfire noises from the TV. "Grandma, you're back," Tyler, the younger one, yelled without looking away from the screen. "Did you see any sharks?" "Just your father," I almost said. Instead, I forced a thin smile. "Just some gulls, sweetheart." Mark wheeled me into the kitchen and parked me by the table with a bit more force than necessary. "You happy now?" he said under his breath. "We have an incident report. You embarrassed me in front of that guy for no reason." "For wanting my chair checked?" I asked. "For not wanting to roll into the harbor?" "You were never going to roll into the harbor." His voice rose. "Why would I hurt you? You think I'd do that? That's sick, Mom." The chicken bubbled quietly in the slow cooker behind him, filling the kitchen with savory steam. For a second, I was 28 again, in this same kitchen, stirring a pot while Mark, 5 years old, tugged at my apron strings asking for a cookie. He'd had such big brown eyes back then, so quick to smile. I blinked the image away. "You said something," I said softly, "about the house." He stiffened. "I told you. You misheard. I said the harbor. Or I don't remember exactly what I said. It was nothing." I watched him, the way his jaw tightened, the way a flush crept up his neck. Maybe you've looked at your own child that way, trying to decide if the little boy you knew is still in there behind the man's face. He shook his head like he was shaking off an annoying fly. "Look, I'm going to run back out," he said. "I've got to pick up a part for the truck. Jen'll help you with lunch." His footsteps pounded down the hall. The front door slammed. I sat alone in the kitchen, the afternoon sun slanting in through the window. Dust motes drifted lazily in the light above the table. My blue enamel mug sat there, where I'd wrestled it out of the cup holder when I got home. A brown coffee stain had dried around its rim. The handle was chipped on one side from years of knocks in the dishwasher. Tom had dented the bottom once when he dropped it off the boat, laughing as he fished it out with the net. "See," he'd said, handing it back to me, dripping. "It knows how to float." I reached for it now, wrapping both hands around the body, feeling the familiar cool of the enamel. Floating, I thought. Maybe that's what I'd been doing for the last few years, not really steering my own ship, just bobbing along on other people's plans. The boys yelled in the living room, something about ammo and points. The slow cooker clicked softly as it adjusted its temperature. I took a breath and wheeled myself to the small secretary desk in the corner of the dining room. It had been my mother's. The fold-down surface creaked when I opened it. Inside, I kept my bills, a stack of old birthday cards and the mortgage statements. I set my blue mug on the desk, careful not to spill the coffee that had pooled at the bottom. It left a circular ring on the wood, right next to my latest electric bill. Slowly, I pulled everything out, bills to the left, bank statements to the right. I used yellow sticky notes. Tom always kept them around for his fishing gear inventory, to mark things. Paid by me, paid by them, shared. My hands moved methodically, even as my mind buzzed. Maybe you've done a similar ritual, sorting through the proof of your own life. It's amazing what jumps out at you when you actually look. Gas bill, my name only, paid from my account. Groceries, my card mostly. Every now and then, a small transfer from Mark. Sorry, Mom, we're a little tight this month. We'll make it up to you. Wi-Fi, my auto pay. Mark had insisted on the fastest package when they moved in. For the boys' schoolwork, he'd said. Mostly, I heard it used for video games and streaming. Car insurance, still mine, though Mark was the one driving my sedan temporarily since his truck needed work. Mortgage, my name, my payment, always on time. And then there were the little things. The Amazon charge for Tyler's sneakers. The emergency dental bill for Connor. The Uber charges when Mark's truck was in the shop again. And I'd said yes to covering them because what mother wants her child stranded? I put a little green sticker next to each of those. I had those from decorating Christmas cards. It seemed fitting somehow. Green, 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 so much green, so little coming back the other way. I leaned back and blew out a breath. The room felt smaller than it had that morning. My chest felt tighter, my heart heavier. The blue mug sat right in the middle of it all, the coffee inside now cold and murky. It looked like a little pond in there, reflecting my face in a distorted way. "How did we get here, Tom?" I whispered, my voice barely louder than the tick of the kitchen clock. When Mark first asked if he and his family could move in, I'd been proud, if I'm honest. Tom had been gone 2 years by then, a heart attack in the grocery store parking lot, of all places. He'd been loading watermelons into our trunk. One moment he was squinting at the clouds, the next he was gone. Sometimes life is that fast. Those 2 years alone in the house had been strange, too quiet. I could hear every creak, every settling moan. I'd talk out loud to myself just to hear a voice. So when Mark called and said, "Mom, we're kinda stuck. The rent went up again and the boys need their own rooms. Any chance we could crash with you for a while?" I'd said yes before he finished the sentence. I'd pictured noisy dinners and family game nights. I'd imagined helping with homework, teaching Jenna my meatloaf recipe, maybe even going to the boys' baseball games. The first night they moved in, I'd put a flower in my blue enamel mug and set it on the windowsill just for fun, a silly little centerpiece. It made me feel like the house was blooming again. At first, it was sweet. Tyler crawled into my lap to watch cartoons. Connor asked me to mend a rip in his favorite hoodie. Mark kissed my cheek in passing, murmuring, "Thanks, Mom. I don't know what we'd do without you." But slowly things shifted. Maybe you've felt that change too, when something that started as love slowly morphs into expectation. The boys' thank yous got rarer. The dishes piled up higher. Jenna's "we'll get to that" never seemed to include cleaning the bathroom. Mark's "we'll cover next month's groceries" floated out there like a balloon that never landed. And the house started sounding different when they talked about it. "This is such a great neighborhood," Jenna said to her sister on the phone once, not realizing I was in the hallway. "We're so lucky. The boys will be able to walk to high school, and the equity we'll have in 10 years, amazing." I'd stood there, my laundry basket on my hip, feeling like my own walls were closing in on me. Equity we'll have. The blue mug had sat on the counter that day, half full of tea, the steam curling up like a question mark. The day after the boat ramp, my neighbor Carmen knocked on my door. Carmen lives 2 houses down in a little white bungalow with overflowing window boxes. She's in her early 40s, a nurse at the hospital, always rushing somewhere. We'd fallen into an easy kind of friendship over the past few years, trading zucchini and casseroles, bringing in each other's mail. "That you, Linda?" she called as she pushed the door open, not waiting for an answer. I saw Mark's truck tearing out of here. Figured either the house was on fire or Jenna saw a spider. I snorted despite myself. "Come in." She bustled into the kitchen, a gust of cool air trailing her. Her scrubs were covered in cartoon kittens. She eyed the spread of papers on my dining room desk, then the blue mug in my hand. "Whoa," she said. "Either you're baking cookies for the IRS or something's going on." I hesitated. Maybe you felt that tug, part of you wanting to hide, part of you desperate to spill everything to someone who might understand. "Something happened at the marina yesterday," I said finally, "with Mark." She pulled out a chair and plopped down, kicking off her sneakers. "Okay, I've got 15 minutes before my shift. Hit me." So I told her about the ramp, about Eli, about the words I'd heard. When I got to "at least the house will be ours," my voice cracked. Carmen's face changed as I spoke. The easy smile slid away. Her eyes darkened. "Linda," she said slowly, that's not okay." "I keep wondering if I misheard," I admitted. "Maybe he said something else. Maybe my brain twisted it. I mean, my ears aren't what they used to be." She leaned forward, her elbows on the table. "Honey, I've seen you catch gossip from 3 rooms away. Your hearing is fine, and even if you misheard the exact words, you didn't mishear his attitude. You've been telling me for months how he talks about this place like it's already his." I looked down at my mug. A bit of dried coffee flaked off under my thumb. "If I say anything, it'll blow up the whole house," I sighed. "Jenna will say I'm dramatic. Mark will swear he was joking. The boys will avoid me." "Let it blow up then," Carmen said gently. "Sometimes you've got to let the pot boil over so you can see what's stuck to the bottom." I huffed out a laugh. "You and your metaphors." She shrugged. "I work with old soup a lot." She glanced at the bills spread out. "Have you ever actually added this up?" she asked, echoing a thought I'd had the day before. "I started to," I said. "Green stickers are things I've covered. Yellow is, they said they would. That stack's smaller than a mouse." She let out a low whistle. "Damn, I knew they were leaning on you, but—" She trailed off, then reached across the table and tapped the mug in my hand. "Do you remember what you told me about this little guy?" she said. "How Tom bought it at that camping store downtown and gave it to you on the boat that first summer?" I nodded. The memory rose up, vivid. The smell of river water and sunscreen. Tom's grin, wide and goofy, as he held up the mug like a trophy. The way Mark had toddled around the deck, clutching a soggy cracker, his hair sticking up from under a too big cap. "You said," she continued, "that you loved it because it made you feel, what was the word, solid. Like no matter how choppy the water got, you had something to hold that wouldn't break." I swallowed hard. "What if," she said slowly, "you made some decisions now that make you feel that way again? Solid. Not like something everyone else just uses when it's convenient." I flinched a little at that because it hit close. "If you're thinking something drastic, I don't know if I have the strength," I said. "Selling the house, moving somewhere small, the idea makes me tired, and then guilty for being tired." "I'm not saying you have to move," she said quickly, "but you have options. You know that, right? You don't have to let them treat your home like some prize they get for, I don't know, showing up. There was a knock on the doorframe. Tyler's head popped in, his hair flopping in his eyes. "Grandma, Dad said he texted you about paying his phone bill this month," he said. "I need service for school." Carmen and I exchanged a glance. "We'll talk about it later, sweetie," I said. "I'm visiting with Carmen right now." He groaned theatrically. "But I needed to scroll TikTok," Carmen cut in with a half smile. "Give your grandma 30 minutes, okay? The world will keep spinning." Tyler rolled his eyes and disappeared. Carmen shook her head. "Phone bill," she muttered. "Of course." She checked her watch and winced. "I've got to go," she said. "But listen to me, Linda." She stood and put her hand on my shoulder. "If any part of you is afraid of your own son, even a little, that's a red flag the size of a bedsheet. And if you decide to do something about it, you don't have to do it alone. There are people whose entire job is to help with this stuff. You're not crazy or ungrateful. You're noticing." Her words hung in the air after she left, heavier than the smell of chicken. Noticing. I looked at the blue mug on the table, at the green stickers, at the incident report from Eli tucked under the stack. The little fish on the mug stared back at me, crooked. That night, I barely slept. I lay in bed, the dark room crowded with thoughts. The house creaked and sighed around me. Down the hall, I could hear the muffled roar of the boys' game, Jenna giggling at something on her show, Mark's voice rising and falling. My mind went back and forth like a pendulum. On one side, Mark as a toddler, running into my arms after falling off his bike. Mark, 12 years old, crying in the front seat after striking out at Little League. Mark, 23, calling from his first apartment, proud and nervous. Every scraped knee I'd kissed, every school project I'd stayed up late helping him with. On the other side, Mark, 42, asking for just a little loan that never got paid back. Mark, 45, moving his family into my house for a few months, then never bringing up leaving. Mark, 46, standing in my kitchen saying, "Well, one day this'll all be ours anyway, so what does it matter?" and laughing when I flinched. This is what mothers do, I told myself in the dark. We help, we sacrifice, we don't make waves. But another voice, quieter but persistent, whispered back, "Helping is one thing. Being terrified on a boat ramp is another." Maybe you've had similar arguments in your own head, lying awake while everyone else in the house sleeps like babies. You trace and retrace the pattern until it hurts to look, but you can't stop. Around 2 in the morning, I gave up on sleep. I swung my legs over the side of the bed and shuffled down the hall, holding onto the wall. In the kitchen, the glow from the streetlight outside painted everything silver. My blue enamel mug sat by the sink, rinsed and upside down on the drying rack. I picked it up and turned it over in my hands. There, on the bottom, was a faint scratch where Tom had once jokingly carved our initials with his pocket knife, L+T. It made me smile, even as my eyes stung. I set the mug on the table, sat down, and stared at the incident report Eli had given me. His handwriting was neat, each letter separate and clear. At approximately 10:17 a.m., observed elderly female in wheelchair rolling unattended down boat ramp. Under remarks, he'd written, "Heard adult male behind her state. At least the house will be ours." Seeing it there in ink did something to me. It made the whole thing feel less like a bad dream and more like data. Tom would have approved of that. By 3 a.m., my mind had made a decision my mouth hadn't yet said out loud. In the morning, after the boys went to school and Mark left to look for work, I brewed coffee and poured it into my blue mug. The carafe steamed on the counter, warming the chilly kitchen. I wrapped my hands around the mug and watched the cream swirl in the dark liquid. Then I picked up the phone and called the number on the little refrigerator magnet my friend Bev from church had given me 2 years ago, after her own son had tried to pressure her into selling her house. Elder law attorney, free consultation, it said, with a tiny picture of a gavel next to a rocking chair. I'd stuck that magnet on the fridge because Bev insisted, laughing, just in case your kids ever get ideas. At the time, it had seemed ridiculous. Now, my hand shook as I dialed. A calm woman's voice answered on the second ring. Law offices of Donnelly and Park. How can I help you? My name is Linda James, I said, clutching the mug. I think I need some advice about my home and my son. The next week was a blur of appointments and paperwork. Carmen drove me to the lawyer's office on her day off, my wheelchair folded into her trunk, my blue mug with its cooled coffee nestled in my lap like a talisman. The office was in a converted old house downtown. It smelled faintly of lemon polish and paper. Diplomas lined the walls. A round woman in her 60s with a silver bob and kind eyes introduced herself as Margaret. You found us through Bev? She asked, smiling. We got her out of a sticky situation, didn't we? She said you were good at untangling messes, I said. I like to think so, Margaret said. Why don't you tell me what's going on, Linda? So I did. I started with Mark moving in temporarily. The bills, the way they talked about the house, the marina, Eli's report. When I handed her the paper, she read it carefully, her brow furrowing. This is serious, she said quietly. I'm glad the harbor officer documented it. I braced myself for skepticism, for the look that says, Are you sure you're remembering right? Instead, she said, You're not overreacting. You're registering a pattern. The relief made my eyes sting. What can I do? I asked. Without, I don't know, throwing them onto the street. They're my family. I don't want to ruin their lives. I don't want to be afraid in my own house. Margaret folded her hands on the desk. You own the home outright, she confirmed. No second mortgage, no co-owners? I nodded. Tom paid it off before he passed. His will left it to me. Then legally, she said, you're in a strong position. Emotionally, it's more complicated. But from a purely legal standpoint, you have options. She laid them out. I could grant them a written rental agreement and set clear boundaries. I could give them a move-out date. I could create something called a life estate, ensuring that I had the right to live in the house until my death, regardless of what happened later. I could change my will so the house went somewhere else entirely. We talked through each possibility, her voice calm and matter-of-fact. At one point, she glanced at my blue enamel mug and smiled. That's a well-loved cup, she said. My husband gave it to me, I said, tracing the rim. It's been with me longer than any mortgage. Then think of this process like reinforcing that mug, she said. You're not smashing anything. You're making sure the handle doesn't snap off the next time someone yanks it around. It was a silly image, but it worked for me. In the end, we settled on a few steps. First, I signed papers creating a life estate that stated, in very plain language, that I had the absolute right to live in my house for the rest of my life or until I chose to move, no matter who owned it after. That way, even if Mark somehow pressured me to change something later, there would be a solid legal wall around my right to stay. Second, I updated my will. I didn't disinherit Mark completely. I couldn't bring myself to do that. But I divided things differently. Some to him and his boys, some to a scholarship fund Tom had always wanted to start at the community college, some to my church. Third, I wrote, with Margaret's help, a simple rental agreement for Mark and Jenna. Nothing fancy, just a piece of paper that said, "You live here, you contribute this much to utilities and food. You treat the space with respect. And if there's violence, neglect, or serious disrespect, I can ask you to leave." Margaret's pen scratched across the paper as I signed. "Remember," she said softly, "documents like this don't mean you don't love your family. They mean you love yourself enough to set some guardrails." The word guardrail made me think of the ramp. I saw again Eli's hands gripping my chair, my own fingers locking the brakes. When we left, I clutched the folder she handed me to my chest, my blue mug balanced on top of it in the crook of my arm. "Feels like a lot," I murmured to Carmen in the parking lot. "It is a lot," she said, "but you did good, girl." I didn't tell Mark about the lawyer right away. I wanted to choose the time and place carefully, like diffusing a bomb. If you've ever had to bring up a hard conversation with someone you love, you know that instinct. In the meantime, small changes were already happening inside me. I stopped automatically reaching for my wallet when someone in the house said, "We're short this month." I put my pills in one of those day-of-the-week containers and kept it in my bedside drawer instead of the communal kitchen cabinet. I asked the boys to rinse their dishes instead of silently doing them later. Some of those things ticked people off more than they should have. Jenna rolled her eyes dramatically when I asked her to please stop leaving wet towels on the hardwood floor. Mark muttered about me getting rigid, but other things went surprisingly smoothly. Tyler started stacking his plates without being asked. Connor offered, out of the blue, to mow the lawn. Maybe they sensed something shifting, even if they didn't know the details. The storm really rolled in when a thick envelope arrived in the mail 2 weeks later. It was my copy of the life estate and updated will sent by Margaret's office. The return address said Donnelly and Park in neat print. I was at the table sipping coffee from my blue mug when the mail slid through the slot. I shuffled over, picked up the stack, and thumbed through. Clothes catalog, charity solicitation, attorney envelope. I'd just set it beside me, planning to open it later in private, when Mark walked in from the driveway, his phone pressed to his ear. Yeah, I'll call you back," he said, hanging up. "Who was that from?" he asked casually, nodding at the envelope. "A law office," I said. No point lying. "Just some paperwork I needed to take care of." His brows knit. "What kind of paperwork?" I hesitated. "Maybe you'd have done the same." Half of me wanted to say, "None of your business." The other half wanted to blurt out everything and get it over with. "It's about the house," I said slowly. He stiffened. "The house? What about it?" I wrapped my fingers tighter around my mug, feeling the chipped handle dig into my palm. "I went to see a lawyer," I said. "We set up some things to make sure I can stay here safely as long as I want, and to make sure my wishes are clear about what happens after I'm gone." His face changed. A flush crept up his neck. "You went to a lawyer," he repeated, without telling me. "Yes," I said, "I did." "Why would you do that?" His voice was rising. What, you think I'm going to throw you out on the street? My mind flashed, unwanted, to the boat ramp, to the cold lick of fear in my gut as the chair rolled forward. I think, I said carefully, that it's wise to make things clear while I'm still able, so there are no misunderstandings later. That's what wills are for, he snapped. Dad already took care of that. He left everything to you, and then it comes to me. It's not that complicated. The entitlement in his tone hit me harder than any wave. It's mine to decide, I said quietly, not yours. He stared at me like I'd slapped him. You're letting people fill your head with ideas, he said. Carmen, that lawyer, that harbor guy, they don't know how families work. We take care of each other. I almost laughed at that. The idea that this situation was mutual still hung in his mind like a faded picture. Taking care of each other goes both ways, I said, choosing my words carefully. Right now, it feels a bit one-sided. His eyes narrowed. Are you threatening to kick us out? He asked. We have nowhere else to go, Mom. Do you understand that? The boys will have to change schools. We'll have to pay triple for some crappy apartment. You want that on your conscience. Guilt surged in my chest, an old familiar tide. But underneath it, something else flowed now, too. A stronger current. Self-preservation, maybe. I'm not throwing you out, I said. I am going to ask that we put some things in writing about contributions to the household, about respect, about timelines. Timelines? He repeated, like the word tasted bad. What does that even mean? It means this arrangement can't be forever, I said. We'll set a date to reevaluate. And if certain things don't change, yes, I may ask you to make other plans. His face darkened. Unbelievable, he whispered, after everything I've done for you. I almost asked him to list those things. Instead, I raised my mug and took a slow sip, giving myself a few seconds. Mark, I said finally, I'm your mother. I love you. But love doesn't mean I have to ignore my own safety and sanity. He stared at me a moment longer, then turned away abruptly, his shoulders rigid. This isn't over, he said, storming down the hall. I'm talking to Jenna, and maybe a different lawyer, one who actually respects families. The front door slammed. My hand trembled slightly as I set my blue mug down. Coffee sloshed over the rim, dripping onto the table. The little fish on the side was half submerged in the brown liquid again. I wiped it with a dish towel, more gently than I meant to. The incoming storm phase lasted about a week. Jenna cornered me in the hallway, her lips pressed into a tight line. Mark says you're trying to cut us out, she said. Do you know how that makes us feel? Like we're vultures or something. I resisted the urge to say, if the beak fits. Instead, I said, I'm not cutting you out. I'm putting some structure in place. Structure, she repeated, rolling her eyes. We already have structure. We live here. We help. This is a multi-generational household. People envy that. I would like that too, I said, if it felt balanced. Her gaze slid to my blue mug on the counter. This isn't about dishes, Linda, she said. This is about trust. We thought we were all on the same page, that this was our home now too. Her use of our scraped against me. We may have different editions of the book, I murmured, and I'm allowed to revise mine. She shook her head. You're being manipulated, she said. By that neighbor, by that lawyer, by that guard who doesn't even know you. They're making you paranoid. Or, I said quietly, they're helping me see things that were already there. She made a noise of frustration and flounced away. The boys were more subdued. Tyler avoided eye contact for a few days, skulking around the edges of rooms. Connor came into my bedroom one night and sat on the foot of the bed. "Dad's really stressed," he said shyly. "He says you're trying to, I don't know, lock us out of the future." I sighed. "I'm not trying to lock anyone out, honey. I'm trying to lock some things in." "Like what?" he asked. "Like the fact that this house is my home as long as I breathe," I said. "No matter what anyone else wants." He nodded slowly. "That seems fair," he said quietly. "Dad gets weird about money sometimes. Mom, too. They think owning a house fixes everything." I looked at him, surprised. "You see that?" He shrugged, suddenly looking older than his 15 years. "I see more than they think," he said. "I heard what Dad said when we moved in. We just have to hang on until the house is in our names and then we're set." My stomach clenched. Hearing it from one person could be mistaken. From two, it was a pattern. "I don't want you to hate them," I said, my throat tight. "They're scared in their own ways. That doesn't excuse everything, but it explains some of it." He fiddled with the hem of his sweatshirt. Then his eyes flicked to my nightstand, where my blue mug sat, half full of tea, catching the lamplight. "Grandma," he said, "are you scared of Dad?" The question hung between us like the pause between waves. "A little," I said honestly. "Sometimes I'm also scared of what happens if nothing changes. That's why I'm doing this. Not to punish him, to protect myself." He nodded slowly. "Okay," he said. "I just needed to know you weren't losing it or something. That there was a reason." "There's a reason," I said. "More than one, actually." He smiled faintly, then surprised me by reaching over and squeezing my hand. "I like living here," he said. "You make good chicken. I hope we don't have to leave." "I like having you here," I said. "We'll see what happens. Whatever it is, it has to be healthier than almost rolling into a harbor." He made a face. "Dad told us that was an accident," he said, "that he tripped." I watched his expression. There was doubt there, a lot of it. "Sometimes," I said, "we tell ourselves stories about accidents because it's easier than facing choices." He sat with that for a moment, then nodded again and stood. "Night, Grandma," he said. At the door, he paused. "If he gets angry and you need anything, you can text me. I keep my phone under the pillow." His concern made my throat ache. "Thank you," I whispered. "Sleep well." After he left, I picked up my blue mug and took a sip. The tea was lukewarm, but it was enough. The public payoff, as Margaret would later call it, came sooner than I expected. It was a Saturday. The boys were at friends' houses. Jenna was out at the salon. I was in the living room, watching a rerun of an old cooking show, my legs propped up, my blue mug resting on the end table beside me. Mark burst in through the front door, his hair disheveled, his shirt half untucked. "We need to talk," he said, his eyes wild. I muted the TV and turned toward him. "What's wrong?" I asked. "I just came from the bank," he said. "They turned me down, again, even though I told them I live here, that this place is basically mine. They said there's a note on the title now, something called a life estate." "What the hell is that, Mom?" My heart thudded. "It's a legal document," I said calmly, "saying I have the right to live here for the rest of my life." He threw up his hands. "I know what it is." They explained it. "What I want to know is why you did it. Do you know what this means? It means I can't use this house as collateral. I can't get a decent loan. I can't plan for anything." I sat quietly for a moment, letting his words hang there. "You plan to use my home as collateral?" I asked. "For the business," he snapped. "For a chance to get us back on our feet. For the boys' future, not to blow in Vegas." He paced the room, running his hands through his hair. "You always said you wanted us to have a stable life," he said. "Well, this is how you get it these days. You leverage what you've got. But now you've gone and made sure nothing happens until you're gone. And at this rate, that'll be—" He stopped himself, but the damage was done. "At this rate, I'll be around a while," I finished softly. "I certainly hope so." He sagged onto the sofa across from me, his elbows on his knees. For the first time, I saw something besides anger on his face. Fear, desperation. "Mom," he said, his voice weary, "I have nothing. No retirement, no savings, no assets. Everything I've worked for has either gone bust or been taken. This house is the only solid thing in my life. Knowing that one day it would be mine was the only thing that kept me from losing my mind some days." The honesty in his voice hit me. This was the part I'd been trying not to see. His terror, his sense of failure, how he'd quietly converted my security into his backup plan. If you've ever loved someone who leans on you that way, you know how hard it is to untangle compassion from self-preservation. "I'm sorry you're in that position," I said gently. "I truly am. I wish things had gone differently for you." He laughed bitterly. "So what? I just accept that I'm screwed and you, sip tea and watch game shows until it's over?" I glanced at my blue mug. "I sip coffee," I said, "and I also talk to lawyers and social workers if I need to. Because here's the thing, Mark, my security is not your safety net." As I said it, I caught myself, remembering some phrase I'd promised myself not to use. I adjusted. "I am not the solution to every hole in your plan," I said slowly. "I can be part of your support system, but I can't be the foundation and the patch kit and the emergency fund all at once. It's too much, and it's not fair." He stared at me, his mouth slightly open. "Since when do you talk like this?" he asked. "You've never—" "Since I almost rolled into the harbor," I said quietly. "Since I heard you say, 'At least the house will be ours,' and realized that somewhere along the way my safety became less important to you than your inheritance." His eyes flashed. "I told you, you misheard. Eli wrote it down," I said, "on an incident report. I have a copy in my desk. And Connor told me what you said when you moved in. We just have to hang on until the house is in our names. That's not mishearing. That's a mindset." He recoiled like I'd slapped him. "You're talking to my kids about me?" he sputtered. "Great, turning them against me." "I'm asking them how they feel," I said. "And they're worried. About you, about me, about all of this." He stood suddenly, his hands clenched into fists. "You know what?" he said. "If you're going to twist everything into some big conspiracy, maybe it's better if we do move out. Maybe then you can sit here with your—" He gestured vaguely at my mug, my TV, my knitting basket. "With your cup and your shows and your papers and feel safe." The sarcasm stung, but underneath it there was a tiny flicker of something that looked almost like relief. Like part of him wanted me to force his hand, to make a decision he didn't have the courage to make himself. "You may be right," I said quietly. "We need to set a date. Margaret suggested 6 months for you to make a plan. I'm willing to do that. We can sit down, all 4 of us, and talk about it." Calmly, he laughed sharply. "Of course you already picked a date with your lawyer," he said. "You had it all lined up before you even mentioned it. Makes me wonder what else you're hiding. Protecting myself isn't hiding, I said. It's overdue. He stared at me a long moment, breathing hard. Then he grabbed his keys from the table. I can't do this right now, he said. I'm going for a drive. He slammed out of the house. The silence that followed rang in my ears. I picked up my blue mug and held it with both hands, pressing it to my chest like a shield. There was a knock at the front door 5 minutes later. For a second, I thought Mark had forgotten something. But when I opened the door, it was Eli, the harbor guard, standing there in his navy jacket, looking slightly out of place on my porch. "Miss James?" he said. "Sorry to drop by unannounced. I got your address from the incident report. I wanted to check on you, make sure everything was okay after the other day, and drop this off." He held up a small plastic bag. Inside was a piece of metal that looked familiar. "The brake lever cover from your chair," he said. "It was loose. I swapped it out and tightened the assembly. Figured you'd want the part." I smiled despite everything. "You didn't have to do that," I said. "Come in, please." He stepped into the living room, glancing around at the family photos on the walls, the scattered shoes by the door. "Nice place," he said. "Thank you." I gestured to the couch. "You want some coffee? I was just having a moment with my mug." He chuckled. "Sure, coffee sounds great." As I poured from the pot, the kitchen felt different, less lonely. The blue enamel of my mug looked almost cheerful against the dark liquid. We sat in the living room, him on the edge of the couch, me in my chair. "How are things?" he asked. "Really?" I hesitated, then decided there was no point in pretending with someone who'd already seen me speed toward the water. "Messy," I said. "I went to a lawyer. Made some changes. My son is upset." He nodded slowly. "Change is hard on people who benefit from things staying the same," he said. The truth of that sentence settled over us like a blanket. "I just came back from the bank," I added, surprising myself with the urge to tell him. "He was trying to use my house to get a loan. They told him about the life estate. He's furious." Eli's jaw tightened. "I'm sorry," he said, "but I'm also glad you've got protections now. When I heard what he said on the ramp..." His hand tightened around his coffee cup. "I've seen some stuff at the harbor. People leave dogs on boats in the heat, kids without life jackets, folks assuming the water will forgive their carelessness. It doesn't. Seeing someone treat a person like that..." He shook his head. "Thank you for writing it down," I said softly. It made it easier to believe myself. He smiled. "You don't need me for that," he said, "but I'm glad it helped." He glanced at the mug in my hand. "That cup been through some storms?" he asked. "A few," I said, "like me." He nodded. "My grandma had one like that," he said. "Bright red. She used to say as long as she could make her own coffee in her own mug, nobody got to tell her what to do." I laughed, the sound surprising me. "Smart woman," I said. "Smart, stubborn woman," he corrected. "Saved her from a lot of nonsense." He finished his coffee and stood. "I won't take more of your time," he said. "Just, if you ever feel like what happened on the ramp wasn't a one-off, there are folks at Adult Protective Services who take that seriously. I can give you a card." He handed me a small white card with a number on it. "I'm not saying you have to use it," he added quickly. "Just options, like life jackets. You hope you never need them, but you put them on the boat anyway." His metaphors were starting to sound like Carmen's. Maybe that's just the universe's way of hammering home a point. After he left, I sat there a long time, turning the card and my blue mug over in my hands. Outside, the late afternoon light slanted golden through the maple in the front yard. I realized, sitting there, that the house didn't feel like it was closing in on me anymore. It felt, for the first time in a long while, like it belonged to me again. 6 months later, the house was quieter. The boys' laughter and slammed doors and thudding footsteps had been replaced by the occasional creak of the old radiator and the hum of the refrigerator. Jenna's citrusy perfume no longer hung in the bathroom. Mark's truck wasn't in the driveway. They'd moved out of my house 3 weeks before the final date we'd agreed on. Getting there had not been easy. There had been shouting matches, cold shoulders, a tearful scene where Jenna accused me of choosing strangers over my own blood. There had been bargaining, promises of change, sudden bursts of affection, followed by pressure. But the rental agreement Margaret drafted, with clear expectations and a clear move-out date, gave me something solid to point to when emotions ran high. "This is what we agreed on," I'd say, tapping the paper, my blue mug steady in my other hand. "I am sticking to it." In the end, the combination of legal firmness and the reality that I wasn't going to budge pushed them into action. Mark picked up extra shifts at the garage. Jenna cut back on some subscriptions and actually cooked a few meals. They found a small townhouse across town, not as nice as my place, but adequate. The day they drove the last box away, the house felt like it took a deep breath. So did I. For the first week after they left, I walked or wheeled through each room slowly, reacquainting myself with my own space. I washed the walls in what used to be the boys' room, humming to myself. I rearranged furniture in the living room so the TV wasn't the focal point. I put fresh flowers in a jar on the kitchen table. And every morning I poured coffee into my blue enamel mug and took it out to the back porch. I'd sit there, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun crawl over the fence, listening to the birds. Sometimes my mind would drift back to the ramp, to the sound of the wheels picking up speed, to Eli's shout, to Mark's muttered words, but the memory no longer made my heart race. It made me grateful, strange, I know. But maybe you understand. Sometimes the worst moments crack things open in a way that lets the light in. Connor came by once a week or so to mow the lawn and check on me. He'd stayed oddly neutral through the whole move-out process, helping his parents pack but also texting me, "You okay?" at night. One afternoon he sat on the porch steps while I rocked gently in my chair, my blue mug on the little table between us. "How's the new place?" I asked. He shrugged. "Smaller," he said. "Walls are thinner, but Mom likes the complex. There's a pool. Dad says the commute is killing him, but it's closer to my school." "And how are you?" I asked. He picked up my mug and examined the little fish. "I'm okay," he said. "It's quieter. They argue less, weirdly. Or maybe they just do it when I'm not home." He glanced at me. "Dad has a lot of feelings about you," he said. "He says you blindsided him, that you listen to everyone but your own family." I winced. "I'm sure he does," I said. "And maybe, from his point of view, it does feel like that." Connor set the mug down carefully. "I told him," he said, "that if he wants you to trust him, maybe he shouldn't have let go of your wheelchair on a ramp and talked about the house like he already owned it." My breath caught. "You said that?" I asked. He nodded. "He got really mad," he said. Then he got really quiet. Then he went out for a walk. "Has he changed at all?" I asked. cautiously. Connor thought for a moment. "He's trying," he said finally. "He went to some kind of financial counseling thing. He and Mom made a budget. He still complains that he'll never get ahead, but he doesn't talk about your house as much. I think he's starting to realize he has to build something of his own, not just... Wait." I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I hope so," I said softly, "for his sake as much as mine." Later that week, my phone rang while I was in the kitchen rinsing my mug. "Hi, Mom," Mark said when I answered. His voice sounded smaller, less sharp. "Hello, Mark," I said. "How are you?" he asked. "You settling in okay? I mean, back to, you know." "I'm doing all right," I said. "The house is quiet, but it's a nice quiet. I'm going to the marina with Carmen tomorrow, just to sit on the bench and watch the boats." There was a pause. "Be careful," he said. Then, after a beat, "I shouldn't have to say that. I should have..." He trailed off. I waited. "Look," he said finally, the words coming out in a rush. "I've been thinking a lot about that day, and about the house, and about how I've been acting. I'm not going to give some big speech and then do nothing different. I need you to know that I get it now, at least a little, that the way I talked about your home was wrong, and that I scared you, and that I'm sorry." Tears pricked my eyes. "Thank you for saying that," I said. "I appreciate it." "I'm not going to lie," he added quickly. "I'm still terrified about money, about the future. That hasn't changed, but I'm starting to understand that pinning all of that on you was lazy and unfair." His honesty moved me more than any dramatic apology could have. "We can talk about those fears," I said, "as mother and son, not as landlord and tenant, not as adversaries." He laughed softly. "Can we maybe not use words like adversaries when we talk about each other?" he said. "I'll try," I said. There was another pause. "Would it be okay?" he asked, tentative, "if we came by Sunday? The boys miss you. I promise we'll bring lunch and paper plates. And our own coffee." I glanced at my blue mug in the sink, water dripping off its rim. "I'd like that," I said. "Come around one." "And Mark?" "Yeah?" "When you come," I said gently, "you come as guests, not as people campaigning for anything. Do you understand?" He was quiet for a heartbeat. "I understand," he said finally. "We'll come as visitors and family, if you'll have us." "I will," I said. "I always will, with boundaries." "Yeah," he said, a little choked, "with boundaries." The day Carmen drove me back to the marina, the wind was sharp, but the sun was bright. Eli waved when he saw us, his beanie pulled low over his ears. "Hey, Ms. James," he called. "Back for round 2? "Just here to watch," I said. "No ramp adventures today." We sat on a bench near the edge of the harbor, bundled in coats, my blue enamel mug full of hot chocolate this time. I'd insisted on bringing my own drink. Carmen teased me, saying, "That mug is your emotional support animal." She wasn't wrong. We watched boats come and go. Kids threw bread at gulls. A couple struggled to back their trailer into the water, arguing good-naturedly. I thought about that first day, the fear, the realization, the way everything had shifted afterward. "I used to love this place," I said quietly. Then I was scared I'd never be able to look at it without thinking of, you know. "And now?" Carmen asked. I sipped my hot chocolate, feeling the warmth seep into my hands. "Now it feels like a line in the sand," I said, "or in the water, before the ramp, and after, before I started saying, 'Wait a minute,' and after." She nodded. That's how it was for Bev, too, she said. Her line was the day her son told her she was moving to a trailer behind his house, whether she liked it or not. Sometimes it takes one sentence to show you the whole picture. Gulls screeched overhead. The harbor water glittered, innocent as ever. Eli came over during his break and sat with us, sipping coffee from a battered thermos. "You look more relaxed," he said. "I am," I admitted. "The house is mine again, on paper and in my bones." He grinned. "Good," he said. "You've got that anchored look." I raised my mug. "Maybe it's the cup," I said. He touched his own thermos to it. "To cups that outlast storms," he said. These days, when I sit at my kitchen table and drink from my blue enamel mug, it means something different than it did a year ago. It still holds coffee, of course, some morning's tea, once in a while hot chocolate if I'm feeling indulgent. Its handle is still chipped. The little fish is still faint. Tom's scratched initials on the bottom are still there, though I sometimes have to squint to see them. But now, when I wrap my hands around that mug, I remember more than our old camping trips. I remember a harbor ramp, a young man with a harbor patch on his sleeve, a neighbor with kitten scrubs, a lawyer with gentle eyes. I remember my own voice, shaking at first, then steadier. I remember saying, "No, and this is mine, and we need to talk," even when my heart pounded. The mug has become, in its own small way, my reminder that I'm not just an extra in my own life. I'm still allowed to steer, even from a wheelchair, even with gray hair and creaky bones. Maybe you're listening to this with your own version of a blue mug nearby. A favorite spoon, a worn-out apron, a chipped plate from your mother's kitchen, some object that's seen every stage of your life. If you've been feeling like everyone else's needs, fill up your cup before you even get a sip. I hope you hear this part clearly. You're allowed to set it down and refill it. You're allowed to say, "This is mine, this space, this time, this safety." Love doesn't mean letting the people you care about push you down a ramp, literally or figuratively, and hope you survive it. Love, real love, has room for boundaries. Now, when Mark and the boys come over on Sundays, they knock first. They bring coffee in a cardboard carrier, and they always set one cup aside and say, "We know you'll want to use your own mug." We laugh, but there's respect in that ritual now. We eat, we talk, we argue sometimes, but the house feels different. The ground beneath us is a little more level. The future is still uncertain for all of us, but I'm no longer bracing for a shove every time the floor slopes. I still go down to the marina now and then. Sometimes Eli's on duty, sometimes not. I stay at the top of the ramp, watching the water sparkle. The ramp doesn't scare me anymore. It reminds me of the day I realized I didn't have to roll wherever other people pushed me. I can lock my brakes. I can ask for help from the right people. I can hold onto my own handles. And when I get home, I set my blue enamel mug on the counter, fill it with something warm, and sit in my own kitchen, in my own house, knowing I chose to be here. If you've stayed with me this long, thank you so much for keeping me company. I really mean it. I'd love to hear from you. What town or city are you listening from? It always warms my heart to see all the places we're connected from. So come tell me down in the comments. If stories like this speak to you and you'd like to help me keep sharing them, you can tap that little super thanks button here on YouTube. Every bit of support truly makes a difference. On your screen, you should see a couple more of my life stories that I think you might enjoy next, if you'd like to stay with me a little while longer. Don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss the next story. Until we talk again, please be gentle with yourselves and take good care.